Hello everybody, my name is Luigi Botta, I'm a law student at the University of Turin and in my life I also work as a professional educator in primary and middle schools. At first glance these two aspects of my life could appear very different from each other, but as I'll show you in a few minutes there are so many peculiar links. In fact, the principal mission of my job consists in going into poorest neighborhoods of Turin in their schools to meet children, their families, teenagers, to make them share their problems and try to solve them together. Of course, most of these problems are directly linked with fundamental human rights violations, social exclusion, and or difficulties in public life's interactions. At the same time, studying as a jurist let me learn lots of things about human rights, principles and laws from a theoretical and practical point of view, starting from historical causes which build national states, national and international law, their principles and their culture of rule of law. So how transitional justice stay part of this scenario and what are the links and differences between its mission and missions like mine. First of all, let's have a clear and general definition of what transitional justice is. According to the International Center of Transitional Justice definition, TJ refers to the ways countries emerging from periods of conflict and repression address large-scale or systematic human rights violations, so numerous and so serious that the normal justice system will not be able to provide an adequate response. Also, United Nations approach to transitional justice reported in the declaration of the high-level meeting on the rule of law is similar. It underlines the importance of a comprehensive approach to transitional justice because it incorporates the full range of judicial and non-judicial measures to ensure accountability, serve justice, provide remedies to victims, promote healing and reconciliation, establish independent oversight of the security system and restore confidence in the institutions of the state, and finally, promote the rule of law. Well, after having given a general definition of transitional justice, and before we go into the heart of how transitional justice procedures and mechanisms work, I think that it is very important to clarify one thing that the previous definitions already said, but that we must be sure to have completely understood. So, what is the difference between transitional justice role and constitutional or international human rights courts? Or, for example, what's the difference between the promotion of the rule of law that every citizen, association, teacher, educator can do in their everyday lives and transitional justice promotion of the same values and principles? To answer these questions, we have to understand that even if the final objectives are the same, what's changed are the battlefields, and then the skills and technical mechanisms to gain them. When people already live in a state with a democratic constitution which organizes itself through the rule of law, founded on universal human rights, we can expect that those people will have adequate public institutions to guarantee and defend their rights and adequate public institutions to make sure that everyone sticks his civil duties. In a situation like this, if someone is victim of a human rights violation or a public abuse, he or she will have adequate instruments and mechanisms to defend himself. And then he or she can get a reparation or an adequate compensation for his or her suffering. Finally, the private citizen corporation, association, or the public officer institution who committed violations against the law, constitutional principles, or human rights will pay for those damages through transparent and certain legal procedures. On the other side, transitional justice acts when all of this is not possible, because we are in presence of a massive and structural human rights violation acted by totalitarian regimes, corrupting public institutions, informal and armed groups able to control some fundamental aspects of public life or specific regions of a country through violence and gender, ethnic, economic discriminations. In this very difficult field, when a state with its population managed to overcome situations like previous one and try to rebuild its rules, principle, institution, transitional justice intervenes with a lot of different procedures and mechanisms to make it possible. The peculiar aspect of TJ is that it can involve several levels: supranational institutions, national states, corporate actors, and individuals, following, for each specific situation, different tempistics and very different methods. But in any transitional justice procedure, we can find some fundamental steps which guarantee altogether the strength of the future democratic state. So, here are the four main objectives of a transitional justice program. Number 1. Truth. By judicial courts or extrajudicial truth commissions, or as I called it, the fascinating aspect of parousia. Why I called this point parousia? When I read the materials about the reconstruction of the truth in transitional justice processes, I remember Michel Foucault's studies about parousia from the book Government of Self and Others. In this book, analyzing ancient Greek democracies, Foucault says that parousia, the faculty to recognize and say the truth, is the heart of the democracy's body. He says that parousia is a political act because it is made in front of the assembly, the boss, the governor, or even in front of the tyrant. And also, recognizing and establishing the truth is fundamental to establish what kind of political organization a population wants to have for itself. Foucault says that the ideal city must put at the center of its principles the culture of truth. I think that for transitional justice, the value of truth is the same. From the transitional justice point of view, truth creates union between the victims, dignity, and new consciousness in the future state. It is the first fundamental step to get to the following ones. And then we are to objective number 2. Prosecutions. We could have very different models of transitional justice procedures and approaches to prosecutions. The most principal models are the punitive and the retributive. These different models have developed through the decades in order to solve specific situations in better and better ways, using major experience and skills from previous TJ's actions in other parts of the world. In fact, today we have a predominance of mixed models which better build an holistic intervention to solve massive human rights violations, finalized in restoring peace and democracy for all the people. In this scenario, prosecutions is important for reparation, to recognize victims' suffering, and this is the third point. Reparation recognizes, as I was saying, victims' suffering and give them the possibility to become a new active citizen in the private and public life. According to the damage, reparation will be guaranteed through direct restitution, symbolic compensation, social rehabilitation, satisfaction of certain instances, and guarantees of non-repetition. This is the fourth main objective of any transitional justice program. In particular, guarantee of non-repetition passes through public actions of institutional reforms as penal code modification, cutting from public life members of armed groups or any other aggressor, and finally modifying where necessary some state institution too. Now, last but not least, after this presentation of the principal hubs of all the transitional justice procedures and mechanisms, I want to clarify some methodological aspects which marks the difference between a successful TJ's activity and a limited one. First specification. Only approaching this field in an holistic way permits to manage coexistence, forgiveness, and dignity for all. Of course, these objectives have to be differently balanced according to the specific situation and massive violations. But in any case, as the UN Guide for TJ Procedures and Mechanisms says, every combination must be chosen, of course, in conformity with international legal standards and obligations. Specification number 2. Successful transitional justice programs recognize the centrality of victims and their special status in the design and implementation of such processes. According to UN guidelines, they must be respected interests and inclusion of victims where transitional processes are under consideration. National consultations conducted with the explicit inclusion of victims and other traditionally excluded groups are particularly effective in allowing them to share their priorities for achieving sustainable peace and accountability through appropriate transitional justice mechanisms. Specification number 3. Of course, there are some limits to what can be overcome in a transitional justice program. Genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. What's most debated in the fact that there is not the same position is the fact that there is not the same position about forgiving or not the due obedience and forgiving or not some crimes after passing of time. These are still open questions that jurists have the responsibility to accept and through experience and knowledge try to answer and solve. Now, I finished my presentation and my shortcut about transitional justice, and I hope to discover more and more things about this very, very peculiar way to solve massive human rights violation all around the world, and I hope to learn lots of practical skills to solve this kind of problem, because for my job and for my personal interest, I think that problem linked to human rights violations and building of new democratic societies all around the world is core objective that every nation, every state of the world should put on the top of this scale of priority, because we see nowadays that even in Europe, the richest part of the world, we see that problem linked to human rights violations, rule of law violations are very, very, very massive. So I hope you join my presentation, and I hope we discover new and useful things together. Bye!